Okay, Mythic Legions Cabal, it's another Wednesday night. Means it's time for an episode of Mythic Conversations, episode 5 of Mythic Conversations tonight. Thank you once again, everyone, for joining me and spending your evening with me talking about Mythic Legions and customizing Mythic Legions. For those that may be tuning in for the first time, or maybe you stumbled upon this on YouTube or in the video section of the Cabal, let me introduce myself. My name is Jeremy Gerard. I'm your host for the show. I'm a Mythic Legions collector and customizer. I also have the privilege of working with Four Horsemen Studios as the digital marketing manager in charge of all the content at sourcehorseman.com. If you want to check out some of my custom work, I've actually got a little change to my setup this week, so I'm doing a little bit of promo here. I thought it actually looked nicer anyway, and it gets that on screen all the time. You can see there, my website is mythiccustoms.com. I post all of my customs there, including photos, recipes, full recipes on everything I do and how to recreate it should you want to take a stab at it yourself. You can also follow me on Instagram. I'm at Mythic Customs. I post there every single morning, usually something new, occasionally photos of previous things. And of course, every Wednesday night at 7:30, I'm here on the Cabal doing this show, Mythic Conversations. So the format, like every week, we'll talk a little bit about Mythic Legions news, talk a bit about what's going on. I have a specific topic, customizing topic to talk about tonight. The last few weeks have been a little more show and telly, where I kind of, the last 2 weeks we're actually talking about adding heads onto Mythic Legions. So there wasn't a lot of tips that I gave. It was more just showing some different options for where you can get some heads. Tonight it's going to actually be a little bit more of a tutorial. Not so much hands-on, but some tips of some things that I think you can do, really simple things you can do to change around some Mythic Legions to get some new looks, and also how you can build on some of these simple skills to do much more complex things. As always, as well, this is a live broadcast, so the cool thing about that is you can ask me questions. I call it Mythic Conversations for a reason. I want to know what you want to talk about. I want to engage with you. So along the way, I will be checking out the comments from the live feed and responding to some of those comments. So let's see what we got so far. Once again, thanks for everyone for joining. Everyone, as usual, saying hello. Thank you very much. Harley saying, you know how I know it's the middle of the week? Yeah, it's right on Wednesdays, right in the middle, hump day, right? You get to come and enjoy this. I actually look forward to this every single week. It's a really nice break in the week for me as well. Like, I look forward, you've got Monday to get through, and then Tuesday I'm already really thinking about, okay, what am I going to do tomorrow night? How do I want to lay it out? What do I want to show? And then obviously all day Wednesday I'm promoting and I'm thinking about the show, getting ready to come on and do it. And then tomorrow, I actually do listen back to the shows on Thursdays. I post them on YouTube, and I listen back to them. I do think it's helpful to listen to the show just so you can see what you've done. That's how you grow. That's how you figure out, hey, I thought this worked. The way you presented this could have been differently. It's enjoyable. I've actually spoken to Travis on the My Wife's Gonna Kill Me podcast and Legions cast about that as well. If he listens to himself after, and he says he does the same thing, that it's helpful to see how you've done. So I do that on Thursdays, and by the time I get through that, it's like Friday, and I'm ready to enjoy the weekend and do it all over again. So yeah, I like the Wednesdays. It works really well. Anthony, you and Tony checking in. Tony, nice to see you again. Thank you. Hope you're feeling better, bud. Thanks for joining us. You're going to stay up this week? You're going to make it through the whole show? We'll see, right? Someone asking, where's the Cabal shirts at? That's actually on my list, so I'll talk about that really quick. You've probably seen Walter teasing the last few days or so. He's been posting photos of different people. Corn Boy and some of the horsemen. He posted a photo of myself, obviously a photo of him, and a number of other people all wearing their Cabal shirts, kind of teasing that something was coming. To be honest with you, when we ran the Cabal shirts last November, Our intention was to just do one run, but we've both been contacted by so many people asking us to run them again. That is the plan right now, that we are going to do a second run of those shirts. That's kind of the classic shirt that I think a lot of people want. At the same time, we do also have a new design that Walter just got in today, just shared it with me today, and it totally blew my mind. I'm super excited for that. So Walter and I are actually figuring out exactly what the plan of action is, whether we're going to offer both shirts at once, whether we're going to do two different orders and split them up a little bit. That all remains to be seen, but we actually are waiting, until the All-Stars 3 pre-order is done. I'm going to talk about that in a moment. But probably within the next few weeks, you'll see an announcement about a new t-shirt order. So get prepared for that. If you missed out on your Cabal t-shirt last time, like I said, we only intended to do one run. We're going to do a second run because of demand. We can't say that we won't do a third run down the road, but we're certainly not planning it. So if you missed out last time and you want a Cabal shirt, keep your eyes open for that. You're going to want to pick that up. So we got Josh Len. Thanks for joining. Guillermo, thanks for joining as well, man. Lord Viteris is here. Nice to see you as well, Joe. If you didn't see, Joe actually posted a couple really, really great deals on the Cabal. He wanted to do something special for the people, wanted to put some good deals out there. So I know he posted a few deals yesterday. I know the Vampire set he posted sold out. He had some Shadow Elves up there today, and he had some Talon Frostbow. So some really cool stuff. So check that out. Check out Joe Vitteri's posts as well on the Cabal, because he's got some really good deals out there. I mentioned All-Stars 3 a minute ago. That pre-order ends next week. I know a lot of people are asking if it's going to get extended. I haven't heard anything. I mean, the plan is that March 2nd is the deadline. Who knows if there'll be an extension? If there is, it's usually not more than about a week. So the bottom line is, if you haven't gotten those orders in yet, time is ticking. You're going to want to get those in. Typically what happens is, after the pre-orders on Store Horsemen are done, the other online retailers like Mallfish and Big Bad Toy Store and Empire Toys, they all put up their pre-orders after that. Obviously, the prices go up. You're going to pay more if you pre-order them through those shops. The advantage is you don't have to come up with the money up front. Most of those places either don't charge until the items are in stock, or I know a couple of them charge a very, very small token amount for the pre-order, versus Store Horsemen, where you pay up front. So that's kind of what you have to decide for yourself, whether you want to save some money but pay up front, or whether you want to wait. There's actually not much other Mythic Legions news that I really need to cover. But before I get into the topic at hand for tonight, obviously this is a Mythic Legions show, but a lot of Mythic Legions collectors are not just Mythic Legions collectors. They collect other stuff. I certainly collect other stuff as well. You always see the scene behind me, which is all Mythic Legions. But I'll turn this around really quick. I did a collection tour a while back, a few weeks ago, and I showed some other stuff. But even right here, you can see that I've got, a display of Transformers. Actually, you know what? Let me just do it this way. It'll be easier because I can actually see the screen. So, I've got a display of Transformers up there, all Masterpiece. And then this middle shelf is kind of like my 80s tribute. Got a couple Transformers there as well, but some G.I. Joes. My custom 6-inch Joes are there, and then all my Marvel Legends. So the point being is, I'm primarily a Mythic Legions collector. I'm primarily a, Four Horsemen collector, but I do collect other stuff as well, like many, let me get that set up again, like many toy collectors out there. So this past weekend was Toy Fair. Huge. This is like one of my favorite weekends of the year, because I love to just log on to websites like the Fwoosh and Toy Arc and just see all the coverage, and even just being on the Cabal and being on Facebook, seeing a lot of people sharing news from Toy Fair, things that they were seeing posted. I actually had a number of my friends that were very cool that were in touch with me all weekend. Steve and Nikki were both sending me photos of the 6-inch G.I. Joes. Did you see this? As soon as the Scarlet was shown and everything, they were sending that to me because they knew that that was something that I was excited about. So very briefly, just talk to you a little bit about my impressions from Toy Fair. I don't collect a ton of stuff anymore other than Mythic Legions. The only thing I actively buy is probably Marvel Legends, and even that I've scaled down on. I've got a pretty large display. I don't need much more. There's a lot of cool Marvel Legends, but there's a lot of stuff that I don't really have room for, like the Age of Apocalypse. Cool figures. I pre-ordered a Dark Beast specifically to use for Mythic Legions customs. I thought the head would work really, really well. I'm not sure what I'll make with it yet, but it had that feel. I didn't get any of the others in that line as cool as they looked. And I remember Age of Apocalypse. I remember reading that storyline when it came out, but there's just only so much room. I'll probably pick up the Fox Universe X-Men figures. Most of my Marvel display now is MCU, is kind of movie related. I do have a lot of comics, like all my X-Men figures are comic related because there wasn't any really good movie versions. So I'll probably pick up those as well. What else was there? I mean, obviously G.I. Joe. G.I. Joe, I was excited about that. I know there's been a lot of debate on Joe forums and stuff about these aren't the classic versions. I'm okay with updated versions. The Snake Eyes look great. I did order the Scarlet and the Duke. I'm going to cherry pick that line. I'm not going to get everything. I didn't get Roadblock. I was never a fan of Roadblock. I don't think I even had Roadblock when I was growing up, so I don't have an attachment to that character. But I'm excited to see what else they're going to have coming out. A lot of the other stuff I saw, I mean, obviously, specifically Horseman stuff, they weren't displaying, but Super 7 had their Turtles there. They had Thundercats. As great as those figures look, I'm not going to get either of those lines. I'm excited for people that are into it. Actually, I have to say, if you're a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles collector, I feel for you because the amount of product between Super 7 and NECA that's coming out is daunting, and it looks great. Like, it looks really, really good. It's just really not my thing. I do have a handful of Turtles up on the shelf I just showed. They're actually a set. The Turtles that I remember that I like are the old Mirage Comics Turtles. They're technically black and white, but even when they reissued them in trades and the covers, they were in color. The covers were, so you saw them, all the red bandanas. My Turtles all have red bandanas, and NECA did a set of those a number of years ago that I bought that I still have, which ironically were actually sculpted by Four Horsemen Studios. Those guys sculpted that set for NECA, so it's appropriate that those are the Turtles that I have. But as cool as that stuff is, as cool as the NECA stuff is and everything, not going to be getting much of that. So I was excited to see it. I'll pick up a few Marvel Legends, but outside of that, and something G.I. Joes. But outside of that, I'm sticking to Mythic Legions. See what else we've got. Eric saying, when is the next in-stock sale? Not to be flippant, sometime after All-Stars 3 is done. That's all I got. I'm not actually positive when it is. They don't actually know when it is. I know that it's in the cards. They're trying to figure everything out. Obviously everything going on right now with the coronavirus, that hasn't just impacted, what the factories that Four Horsemen Studios works with, but that's impacted factories all throughout China. So that's definitely causing all kinds of companies, Four Horsemen included, to look at production schedules and figure out exactly, what impact, if any, there's going to be. That shouldn't affect an in-stock sale, but it goes into the mix. So it is coming. I don't have a specific date for you. As soon as I know, and we can post it on the website, everyone will know. Jeff saying, finally get to catch live. Thanks for joining us, Jeff. That Gray Hulk is going to be great for Legions. You know what? Actually, you mentioned that. The red Hulk, that's a Target exclusive. I haven't seen it in person. I've only seen the pictures. But I was looking at that today thinking, I wonder if that would be like a cool, kind of like big, burly, like Fury Ogre or Fury Orc. I'm not positive how big it is, if it's Ogre, like Mythic Legion's Ogre scale, or if it's just a little, like somewhere between the normal scale and the Ogres. If I see it in person at a Target, I might pick one up just to try to use it to fudge it into the display as like a Fury type clan character, but we'll see. So let's jump to the topic at hand. And again, along the way, you can ask questions and I'll certainly engage. As I said, I wanted to do something that was more tips focused today. So I was looking at the different topics. I actually have a list of topics that I want to talk about in coming weeks. And one of them that I thought would be really interesting was talking about all the cool stuff that you can do, all the significant changes you can make to Mythic Legions just by using an X-Acto knife. So this little tool right here, this little utility blade, craft blade, it goes by a bunch of different names. I call it an X-Acto blade. That's actually a brand name. That's like calling an adhesive bandage a Band-Aid or a cotton swab a Q-tip. It's the name that a lot of people know, but it's technically a brand name. So this little tool, outside of paintbrushes, I probably use this tool for Mythic Legions customizing more than anything else out there. Great multi-purpose tool that allows me to do a lot of really cool stuff. So what I did tonight was I put together a whole bunch of figures that they have other customizing done to them besides just cutting in most cases. But these are all different changes that I made using an X-Acto knife. And I want to show you some ideas because I think some of this stuff is cool things that it's hopefully going to inspire you to make some changes on your end, to do some of these things for yourself. So I broke these down into some really easy, simple things you can do, some more moderate type stuff, and then of course some more complex cutting that you can do. One thing I will say before we get started with this, these things are clearly super, super sharp. When you are using these, you're going to want to be careful. I hack my hands up all the time with this thing. So you definitely want to be careful. Be safe. When you are cutting, don't cut towards yourself. If you're and it's tough because you're holding these little things. When you're holding in your hand, be mindful of, if I slip right now, where is that blade headed? If that blade is headed at the meaty part of your hand, you're in trouble, okay? You want to avoid that. You want to cut away from yourself. I know a lot of people wear safety like gloves when they do this. I find it hard to do that because a lot of the stuff I'm dealing with is so small. I've tried it before. I'm not comfortable with it. If you can do that, wear safety gloves. That's a huge advantage. I also find sharp blades are very, very helpful. If you're finding the blade is getting dull, and they do get dull pretty quickly, these blades are replaceable. They're super cheap. Buy a couple packs of blades. If you feel like you've used your blade for a little while and it's not cutting the way it should, just replace the blade. I also find that heating the plastic you're going to cut goes a long way as well. By heating it and making that plastic softer, it's going to make it so much easier to cut through. That being said, sometimes if you're trying to cut and it's giving you a little bit of resistance and you add that little bit more pressure, it's going to go from, I can't get this cut, to boom, I just sliced right through. Be aware, you are going to ruin things if you do this. You are going to ruin things with an X-Acto knife. That's why I'm suggesting start small, because a lot of the small pieces I'm going to show, if you ruin it, you probably have extras in your fodder bin, things like loincloths and stuff. Some of the more complex stuff are going to be like faces, like actually cutting apart Mythic Legion's heads. You probably don't have as many of those lying around, or at least not the one you're cutting. Those are a little more, they are tricky, but they're a little more impactful if you make a mistake. So be careful. If something is having some resistance, heat it up, change the blade, and just take your time. Where's my water? Oh, here we go. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to talk about is capes. Soft goods capes. A number of Mythic Legions come with them. Outside of Tibius. Tibius came with one that was a little shredded. There's a couple others that look a little dirty, but most of the time they're just nice, solid pieces of fabric. Depending on what you're looking to do, using an X-Acto knife to shred those can give you a really, really cool look. So This character here is one I call Baron Sorrow. So he's one I actually showed last week when I was talking about custom heads. This was a custom head that was done by a gentleman named Walter DeMarco, Mass Customs Toys on or Mass Customs on Shapeways. Loved this head. Wanted to go for a really kind of gritty looking warrior type character. Used a cape from a Vorgus Vermilius, the blood armor. Now that's a black fabric cape. And what I did was I shredded that cape up to give that really kind of ratty, tattered look. Super simple, okay? What I tend to do when I cut them is I don't just put the fabric down and slice. Because if you do that, these things are so sharp, you're going to get nice, clean cuts. And that's probably not what you want. So one thing I do, a lot of times, I will actually cut while I'm holding it like this. So I'll actually just put in and just tear through it. I just did it. That's going to give you a much nastier looking cut. Other times I cut like at the bottom and then I'll actually rip it with my hands. That's going to give you a lot of this shredded type look. Sometimes I also will lay the cape down, take the X-Acto knife and just kind of run the X-Acto knife over it lightly. That'll shred the edges. It's a fine line because if you go too hard, you're just going to literally slice the fabric apart. You're going to slice it off. And you'd want to avoid that. But just kind of hitting the edges with that will shred them up even more. And it's super, super easy to do. Another example. Oh, just lost the goblin. Let me put him back. Another example is this character I have here. So this is a character that I call the Bear. It was based on a book series I read called The Bear and the Nightingale. I actually showed one of the characters last week. I call it the Winter King. His name's Morzoko, and it's based on a character. This is another character in that book series. Wanted, again, big, brutish-looking warrior. I had this cape, which I'm not even sure which figure this came from, to be honest with you. It might be an Attila Leosair. It might be his cape, but it was in my fodder bin. I actually draped it over just one shoulder, put it under one pauldron so it hangs down just one shoulder to that style. But then once again, just shredded that cape. Super, super simple. And obviously, if you're watching this, you're thinking probably, okay, you're talking about shredding fabric with a knife. That is pretty simple stuff. But this is a start. This is a start. And if you compare this to what it looked like before it was shredded, it is a very, very different look that you can get started with. This head was also cut apart and customized too, so I'll actually talk about that in a few minutes. But to start with, one of the easiest things you can do is just shred some soft goods pieces with these knives. It'll give the characters a nice, ratty, worn look. You know, one of the cool things about a lot of Mythic Legions is because of the detailed paintwork on them, the mud on the boots and everything, they look, the realm of mythos looks lived in. That's really, really cool. And even some of the Legion builders that don't have those paint apps, it's super easy to add some of those mud and some of the grime to them to make them look like they've lived in this universe. Same thing with the capes that you can do. So another easy change you can make that's maybe a little more impactful is loincloths. So like many Mythic Legions parts, there's a limited library. Lots of figures all come with the same loincloths. But with some really simple cuts, you can change the look of those pieces. So first one I'll show here is this goblin. Okay, so this goblin comes with this loincloth. The nice thing about a lot of the loincloths is they're designed to almost have like layers of armor. Like the dwarven loincloths have like a bunch of like different, I don't know what to call it, but different pieces that are all interconnected together. The goblin loincloths have a very segmented type design. You can just take the knife and cut along some of those segments to do really minor little changes to change how it looks. Let me take that off and show it to you. So, I mean, it's super, super minor, but by just taking out the bottom piece over here on this one, you get a different look. Another example is this one here. So this is the standard elven type loin piece, right? And again, this is what I was talking about. The elven loin piece and the dwarf loin piece, they have these different segmented little parts. If you just take the razor and you start to slice against those pieces, you can do something pretty cool. So this is a character I did. This was my changeling character, my tribute to G.I. Joe Zartan. And you can see that I just took the bottom few pieces of that loin away. But it gives it now that jagged bottom. So instead of this nice, like this looks so clean, it looks great for like the woodland characters, like the Elf Ranger having this looks really, really good, really appropriate. But my character of Zartan, I wanted him to have a little bit of a grittier type look. Just that one simple change. I mean, I literally cut out I cut out 3 little pieces. So the bottom 3 there, the bottom 3 of that little triangle at the bottom and then the 2 right above it, I cut those pieces out to get that. I mean, this is 5 seconds worth of work. Super, super simple. And as I said, because you're following the exact lines here, it's very, very easy to just make those cuts. It's hard. You're probably not going to mess it up, but even if you do, these are the type of things that you might have extras of in your fodder bins that you can, if you do mess one up, you can try again. Let's look at a dwarf one. So this is what the dwarf one looks like. And when I made this female dwarf character, I liked the look of it. I wasn't trying, like with the Zartan, I was trying to change the profile. This, I just wanted it to be smaller. I just didn't want as much armor because I wanted it to show more of like the lower legs and not hang down as much. So once again, I just made a few little cuts right around the edges and you get a very different looking loin. Very, very simple stuff, but when you start looking at all of your Mythic Legions figures, when you have a big display, some of these little changes can really start to make a big difference. Someone said, old woodwork is blade, dull blade is more dangerous than a sharp one. Yeah, I agree. I mean, if nothing else, you put more pressure and it's easier to slip. Thanks. Yeah, that was a good tip from Lee. So super simple. Another really simple one is weapons. So that goblin that I was looking at, this Goblin Legion builder comes with a spear. The spear is huge. It's, made for much larger characters. I always thought that it looked a little too big in the goblin's hand. So really simple. I just sliced the bottom of it. I just made a smaller spear for him. I posted this last week when I posted my Baron Sorrow character. I wanted him to have a different look to his sword. So what I did to a standard Mythic Legion sword, I just cut the edges off. The way that handle, the part that comes, the handguard, I guess, the way that comes up with those little pieces, it's such a distinctive part of the Mythic Legion sword design, but just by removing those little pieces, it really changes the look of the sword. Super, super, super simple. The toughest part of this was making sure that I took about the same amount off on either side because you did still want it to be somewhat symmetrical. So those are some simple things. You get yourself an X-Acto knife, you can do any of these things and it will take you minutes to do. And I'm telling you, like especially the loincloth pieces, that can really make a cool difference. Let me set these back up real quick. So what would I say is a more moderate, a more, mid-level type cut? So let's talk about shoulder armor. Just like loin armor, shoulder armor figures all come with the same shoulder armor. So one of the things that I showed today, actually I posted this morning, was I called it one of the Ghosts of Karamor. It's a little set that I've created. Basically, it's a bunch of green-boned skeleton characters. I picked up a lot of scaphoid figures. I had a bunch of them, And I said, you know what, I'm going to make a little team of these characters. So the one I showed today, this character here, this is essentially just a scaphoid figure. What I did was I put actually a 2.0 skeleton head on him. I had to Dremel out the bottom of it to get it to fit. I repainted it to go with the green scaphoid bones. And this helmet piece, this actually is from a WWE Create a Superstar set. Painted that to match the armor, and it fits really nicely on the head. Really cool look. But one of the things I wanted to show was what I did with the shoulder armor. So you can see that this shoulder armor here is one of the standard pieces of shoulder armor that they all come with. Okay, it's got like the 2 different levels. All I did for the other side was slice that bottom level off. Okay, and once again, just like I was talking about with the loin pieces, because you're cutting against specific lines, there's a specific line all the way around this shoulder armor. All you need to do is cut along that line. Now, this is a perfect example. If you do not heat these, they are really hard to cut. They will be very, very hard to work with. Heat them up. I took a mug of hot water, threw it in the microwave for 2 minutes, dunked this in, just put it in there for 30 seconds, pull it out. The plastic is so much easier to work with, so much more malleable, that I was able to get that blade in and just cut right along that little ridge. And that right there, it just gives it a very, very different look. Now, I actually only did one of them because I did it actually, I cut this last night and took pictures of it last night to post this morning specifically for tonight's show. So I wanted to have one of each so I could show the contrast. But if I cut both of them like that, it would give a different look. It would look like different shoulder armor. And you can do the same thing. The really big ones I don't do as often, but the orc ones, the really spiky ones, those have really definitive lines too. I've taken off the bottom of those, and that gives it a different look for the shoulder armor. All you have to make sure you're aware of when you cut these is that you don't cut the piece off that has the back peg. That back peg still needs to be present to plug into the back of the figure. As long as you maintain that back peg, you can cut these down any way you want. And really different look. Like I said, if you're trying to just change up the armor of your figures a little bit, that's a simple way to do it. This figure too, actually, you can see the loincloth. I sliced it apart. I've done this a number of times. I've sold a handful of like undead Templars over time, where I've taken a Templar Knight Legion builder, I've swapped in some bones, and I've dirtied it up significantly, painted it really, really nasty looking to make it look like that Templar had just risen from the grave. And one of the things I did for all of them was cut this loin piece here. Now, unlike the other loin pieces, this doesn't have lines you're going to follow. So, you can't follow that pattern, but I'm just trying to make it look shredded and messed up. So it is a high level here where if you can't really make much of a mistake as long as you don't slice right through it, and even that you could probably work with. Even that you could say, oh, it's just really, really ripped over there. But I just put some little holes in there, cut out some little wedges, painted some stuff. Sometimes when you cut, the plastic that is revealed isn't the color of everything else. So I just went in there with a little bit of black paint to fix that up so you wouldn't have like white plastic edges. Again, not hard, a little bit harder than cutting just the loin pieces, certainly harder than cutting the capes, but again, something you can do that will really add a different look to your figures. So here's one that I think is pretty cool. A while back, when I was really building a lot of goblins, customizing a lot of goblins, I very quickly realized that I don't have any female goblins. I need female goblins, or I should say, need is a big word. I want female goblins. So how do I do that? Looking at the different parts that they have, how do I make female goblins? And one of the things that I thought would be cool, because I wanted to kind of use Mythic Legions parts. For my first female goblins, I didn't want to go third party. I didn't want to have a whole different aesthetic for the figures. I wanted it to have that Mythic Legions aesthetic. So I looked at the female orcs in the line, Queen Urxa and the orc female Legion builder. or actually she's not a Legion builder, just builder. I think no, it isn't. Is it? I always get confused if it's a Legion builder. There's a lot of debate. Is something a Legion builder versus a builder? The terminology gets a little confusing. But the female orc that was in Advent of Decay, that's not Queen Urxa. I looked at both of those and said, those work really, really well. But the part that was wrong was the ears, because the orc ears kind of go straight up, whereas the goblin ears go out. So what I did was I had a ton of Goblin Legion builders. Goblin Legion builders come with 2 heads each, including that fully helmeted head. The ears are kind of exposed. I actually sliced the ears off of a Goblin Legion builder, and then I took a Queen Urxa, or actually the first one I did was the actual the actual Orca Legion. I took that and I sliced the ears off the Orc, and then I glued the ears from the Goblin onto the Orc female head. That really, to me, changed up the profile to make it look much more Goblin-like. Just something as simple as that, cutting off those ears, gluing these right on, and I customized the rest of the body. I put together these pieces, the soft good bottom here that comes from Lord of the Rings, like a ring wraith or something. But it works really, really well as a female goblin. And one of the things that personally was really cool was shortly after I posted this was ToyCon New Jersey last year at some point. I think it was after the mid-year show, like the June show. And I was talking to Eric Treadaway from the studio, and he referenced this particular figure, and he said, you know what? I hadn't actually given much thought to female goblins, but when I saw your custom, I said, yep, I'm going to have to do female goblins. So it's on their radar as well, which is pretty cool. And the fact that I had done something that spurred, even Eric to think and to get his creative juices flowing, that was super, super rewarding for me personally. And I did something similar. This one worked so well, cutting off the ears and creating my female goblin, that I repeated that, but with the Queen Urxa head this time. So I had an extra Queen Urxa from using the custom, and what I did here was the same kind of thing. I cut off her ears, and I put on goblin ears. Now, in this particular one, I did even more. Queen Urxa comes with the skull kind of crown piece on top. I removed that. It's not meant to come off, but it does. I'm going to do a whole show down the road all about removing Mythic Legions parts that aren't technically meant to be removed, like removing the heads from the hooded, like the hoods, like what we have here. Those heads come out. Like when I did this figure, when I did that Zartan face, I didn't paint that inside the hood. I removed that face so I could paint the hood the right color and then paint the face and then pop that back in. It's not hard to remove it. Like I said, it's not as easy as removing the arms and the feet and the heads, the stuff that's meant to be removed. But there's a lot of stuff that you can get apart on these figures to using customizing. I'm going to do another show on that down the road. But for this one, I removed that skull, and I actually used it on I can't think of her name now, but the Hera Serpentspire. So I used her with Hera Serpentspire to create kind of like a voodoo queen character. And I used that skull on Hera Serpentspire. This band is actually from Hera Serpentspire. So I cut that off Hera, glued it here, and then this ponytail piece on back is just a standard ponytail that instead of plugging it into a hole on the back of the head like you see here, that just plugs into a hole. I didn't have a hole to plug it in, but I had a much larger hole that I could just glue it right into. I didn't want to remove it, so it worked really, really well to create my second female goblin. So once again, once you start cutting these things, you'll start to see that you can do more and more. Notice her sword. I wanted her sword to be different. I wanted it to look like she was wielding like just a messed up weapon that she had picked up off the battlefield and was just going to hack someone apart with it. Really, again, super gritty. This weapon she's holding here, this kind of fork, that was in my fodder bins from like a DC Aquaman figure. The shoulder pads are from, this is from WWE, this is from Lord of the Rings. So she's a hodgepodge of different pieces, but a lot of what I did here was cutting parts off Mythic Legions figures and off other figures and putting it together to create this kind of look. Something I would consider a more moderate level type of cutting project. Let's see what we got for comments before I go on to the next level, the more advanced ones. Anthony says he's stealing that sword hilt idea. Please do. That's why I post them. That's why I share stuff like this. Travis is late to the party. Thank you for joining, Travis. Better late than never. David is here as well. David, thank you for joining as well. So the next category I'm going to talk about is much more complex type cuts. These are things that, quite frankly, are a little scary. When you're cutting a Mythic Legion's head, and especially if it's the only one of that head you have in your fodder bin, it will give you some anxiety. It is a bit scary. But the results of what you can accomplish are super, super cool. So let me show you a couple examples. Take a drink of water first, and then we'll get going on that. So this is one I did that I thought was pretty cool. This is, and by the way, I said this the last couple weeks, but let me reiterate it here. I am aware that trying to see the detail on some of these things through the webcam is not always the best way. You can't always see all the detail. After tonight's show, I will post better photos of everything you are seeing here. All of these customs. I will post a follow-up post tonight in the Cabal with all those photos, so you can check that out. You can see much better photos of all of these pieces. But this is one, talking about what we were just discussing, removing pieces that aren't meant to be removed. This was actually a Balthar Shadowhorn head. But that typical, bearded dwarf head or barbarian head, however you reference it, but that head with the helmet at top and the beard that comes down, similarly like the hooded head I talked about, that beard is pegged in. You can get it out. So by getting that out, I still had the hole for the neck is part of the helmet itself. So it still goes on the head, no problem, but the whole lower part was missing. So what I did was I took just a skeleton, head that I had in my fodder bin, and I cut the lower part of that skeleton, and I just glued it on there. Gives you a different looking skeleton character. Oh, and it just totally released. The glue just released a little bit, but you get the point. Totally different looking skeleton that you can have for your shelf. Super, super simple cut. Again, when you're starting to slice that skeleton apart, it's going to be a little bit nerve-wracking. Pulling out the beard is simple. You can actually just peg it right back in. That you're not going to break anything. But cutting that skeleton, if that's the only skull you have, that's going to be a little nerve-wracking. Take some time. There's that old adage, measure twice, cut once. Look at what you're cutting. Think about where should this actually sit, okay? Based on where the helmet comes to, at what point should the face be? Do I cut above the nose? Do I cut below the nose? Where do I actually want to cut? Obviously, you can always take more off. If you don't cut enough, you can always trim it a little bit to glue it in. If you cut too much, that's going to be more problematic. So take your time and really plan out exactly where you want to cut before you do something like this. But I'll be honest, this was super, super simple. And it made a very different. This is actually a really old piece that I've had up there for quite some time. I think actually, if I'm not mistaken, I think Zombie 13 actually saw this, because when I posted this was long before the Cabal. When I first posted this was back on the old forum on the website. And I think Zombie actually saw me do this, and he did something similar, and he actually cast it, and he sold a few of these for a while. It was a really, really old, it was something he would have sold a long time ago. He probably only did a couple pieces of it. But if memory serves me, I never got one from him because I had this one. But if memory serves me, he did do that. So talking about cutting faces, here's one I did that I thought was just smart. I just when I did it, when I came up with the idea for it, I was super, super proud of it. Last year for Halloween, I did a series of posts. There's a book that I read every single Halloween that I'm very, very attached to. It's a book by Ray Bradbury called The Halloween Tree. Read it every single year. It tells the story of, it's a group of friends, young kids that are, they go on an adventure to find out the meaning of Halloween. They're trying to save their friend. But during their travels, they go to different places in time. They go to Egypt, ancient Egypt. They go to Rome. They go to Paris to see the building of Notre Dame. And all the places they go are based on the different costumes they're wearing. One of them is dressed like a mummy, hence ancient Egypt. One of them is dressed like a skeleton, and they end up going to Mexico for the Day of the Dead festival. And there's one character dressed like a witch. So I thought it would be cool when I did all these characters. That week I posted, all of the different costumes, all the different characters from the Halloween tree. I posted a custom of all of them. So I posted a gargoyle, and I posted a monkey man. I posted, a mummy and a skeleton and death. All of these characters. One of them I did was a witch. So there are female magic users. Like, you could say that Hera Serpentspire is kind of witch-like, I guess. But I wanted the classic green skin, long, warty nose type witch, pointy hat. So looking at the parts available to me, I actually keyed on to a snag figure. That goblin has the green face and the long nose, but it looks very goblin-like. Well, by taking that figure and actually cutting out the teeth, it totally, in my opinion, transformed that face from a goblin to a super classic looking witch. Now, the hat is actually just from Lord of the Rings. It's actually a Gandalf hat that I painted black. The broom that she's holding is actually from a Nightmare Before Christmas witch figure. The body's a mix of Mythic Legions with a robe from a Star Wars Black Series Kylo Ren. So it's, again, another hodgepodge of pieces, but it all started by just taking that snag head and cutting out the teeth to give that very witchy type look. Just another way that you can use an X-Acto knife to cut these things to make some changes to the existing sculptures. Okay, so on that same note about cutting heads apart, you saw what I did with the skeleton. Well, it's also something I've done with a dwarf, and I can't claim to be the first one to have done this. I actually saw Nikki do this for the first time, where she looked at the different dwarves that were there, and she said, you know what? We've got beards, we've got helmets. Let me try to combine them differently. Anthony actually just jumped back, said the Halloween book was made into an animated movie. It was actually made into an animated movie. Hanna-Barbera did it a number of years ago. The movie's great. I love the animated. It's actually a little bit different than the book. But it's a lot of fun. Actually, the author, Ray Bradbury, narrates it. And one of the main characters in that story is a character called Moundshroud. And in the cartoon, it's actually voiced by Leonard Nimoy, which is kind of cool that Spock does that voice. But that's a little side note. So I've been trying to separate the Legion Builder armor face for a few days. So Chris says, I've been trying to separate the Legion Builder armor face for a few days with no luck. Chris, I'm not sure which Legion Builder you're referring to, but I'll show you one of the things that I did. So as I was saying, I saw Nikki actually combine some different dwarf pieces. Specifically, I saw her take like a beard from that traditional dwarf bearded head and slice apart the other dwarven Legion Builder head, the one that doesn't have a beard, the fully armored head. That has a different top part than the bearded one does. So by combining those together, you got a very different look. And that made me think, you know what, I want to do something similar for my Frost Dwarf. So this was a figure that I put together, and you can see this top part here. The body on this, the base on this, is a Silver Dwarf Legion Builder. Okay, I gave him some axes from a Talon crossbow, a Frostbow. These axes never worked really well for me with Talon. I guess I just didn't imagine like a female elf wielding something like this. This looked like a much heavier type weapon, but a Frost Dwarf could totally get behind that. I used actually the fur from Talon as well. And I did add some paint to this, but primarily this is a Silver Dwarf Legion builder that what I did was I sliced the bottom of that head, the bottom of that face apart to totally get rid of that lower piece. And then this beard is from a King Bromden Ironjaw. Now, when you do stuff like this gets really tricky because trying to cut at the exact right angle so it glues up there perfectly and there's no dead spots, it is very, very hard. I didn't accomplish it with this. I actually had along the edges some places where I just could not cut the beard to naturally fit up there. So what I did was I used something called Epoxy Sculpt. This is a 2-part sculpting compound that I'm going to do a show on down the road. I don't use it very often because I'm not very good with it, but for something like this, for just a little bit of filler, it works really, really well. It's 2 parts. You combine them together. You take up equal pieces from each, rub them together, and then it works kind of like clay. You put it in there. You can certainly shape it a little bit. Within 24 hours, it cures. It's really, really hard. You can actually paint it. You can sand it and any of that stuff. So I use that just to fill in some of the edges. And it also adheres really well, too, to the 2 pieces. It almost acts like a bond. But that is just an example of cutting 2 pieces apart in order to put them together and get a very different look. This dwarf, when I put this with my other dwarves, he doesn't look like anybody else because he combines parts, even though I have tons of figures that use this particular head, and I certainly have a Bromden Ironjaw that uses that very distinctive beard. This combination, something as simple as just combining those 2 parts, really do give me a new look for my character. It is definitely, I've ruined a King Bromden. So I have a beard in back that I've completely messed up. I'll find a use for it down the road. I'll certainly figure it out. Luckily, I had more than one of those heads in my fodder bin, so I was able to, try it again. But definitely when you're cutting a head like that, it's nerve-wracking. I'm not going to lie. But the results are well worth it. One thing I forgot to show earlier, actually, I just saw on the table. So I talked about when I cut the ears off the orcs, the ears off the goblins and put them on to some female orcs. Well, I actually had both. I had a goblin legion builder that had no ears, and I had a bunch of ears lying around. So I actually tried this as well, where what I did was I took that goblin legion builder head. And like I said, the goblin ears come out, whereas the orc ears go up. So I put the orc ears on this to kind of create a whole new look for an orc head. And there's just like a ponytail. That's from a Lord of the Rings figure. Instead of the spike on back, I plugged that in. But another way that you can reuse these parts and get some different looks. So Chris is saying, yes, that's the non-bearded dwarf. Yeah, if you look at that head, right, there's almost like kind of a, what is it? There's kind of like a semicircle that comes down. I cut right along that. Cutting the dwarf head actually wasn't the hard part because there was a line that you could follow. It's really cutting the beard and figuring out what angle do I have to cut that beard at. Where do I cut it? Do I keep some of the nose? Do I cut right under the nose? Trying to figure out exactly where to cut. That was the more challenging piece. Cutting the dwarf head that's actually not too bad. I've done that same thing as well. One of the G.I. Joe tribute figures I did, the one I did of Rock and Roll, that actually combines some different pieces as well. That combines the top part of the Bromden head that I had left over with a lower beard from the typical like barbarian looking beard. So once you start cutting these apart and you have these different pieces, you can play around and actually create some cool stuff as well that way. And once you get more comfortable with this and you're really like, you know what, I'm comfortable with the tool, I'm comfortable with how the plastic cuts, how much I have to heat it, you can start to do some really kind of cool, crazy stuff. So check this one out. This is one that I posted as part of my Samurai, my Mythic Shogun series. But this whole giant helmet that he's wearing, that my warrior is wearing, that came from a Spawn figure. It's called Dojo. And I ripped it off the Spawn figure. it wouldn't fit on top of the Borrier because the Borrier's got a whole top of his head. So this is glued in place now, so I can't show the cut, but I actually cut the Borrier's head, the whole top, his ears, and the whole top of his head. I cut that, even the front there, very, very meticulously. This took a lot of time, and I had to do very, very small cuts to make sure I had what I wanted, so this piece fit on essentially seamlessly. Like, if you look at this in person, I painted it to match. It actually looks like one piece. It doesn't look like this top piece was glued on to something that was cut. It's just practice. This is just being comfortable with the razor, not being afraid to slip and cut myself, and taking the time to actually do the cuts and, like I said, measure twice and cut once. So that's an example of what you can do. Now, I do have one other tip, a little bonus piece that you can do here. A lot of the, I'm sorry, I just saw a comment, I'm going to read it. Let us have the ability to mix and match similar to back in the Scarabeus days. That's something okay, I'm sorry. So I think that what Joe is saying is he's referring to Scarabeus, where the Scarabeus figures came with, they kind of had like the horns, and the face was kind of like a faceplate that popped off, and you could pop different faceplates in. Yeah, I mean, maybe we'll see that again. What I was going to say was that a lot of the Mythic Legions figures, when they come with capes, they come with soft goods capes. And I know that people have different opinions on soft goods versus plastic capes. To be honest with you, I was always really into plastic capes. I didn't really like soft goods. Soft goods have come a long way. You know, obviously what like Mezco is doing with their 112 line is phenomenal. Really, really great work on soft goods. And even what the Horsemen have done with the capes, they're very simple. They're not at the level of complexity that you certainly have with Mezco, but they're very serviceable. And they were upfront why they were doing soft goods capes. It was for stuff like the horses. So, you know, the Aerothere wave introduced the horses into the line, and capes, soft good pieces, were for characters that wanted to ride horses. If you have a plastic cape, it makes it look, it's a lot harder to seat them on that steed and let the cape flow naturally. A lot of times it's like, what do? Do you sculpt a cape just to go on the back of the horse, and then you have a second one that if they're standing? So they address that by doing soft goods. I love what they've done, but sometimes I do like to still use plastic capes, especially from other toy lines. WWE have some figures with capes. Marvel Legends have figures with capes. Lord of the Rings have tons of figures with capes. I talk about Lord of the Rings parts on this show all the time and how to use those pieces, which is very funny because I get contacted by lots of fellow Mythic fans in the Cabal about Lord of the Rings lots. I've been getting questions about like, hey, do you think this lot is priced right? I've been actually, it's funny, I just picked up a big lot of Lord of the Rings figures on eBay to break them apart and use for pieces. And as part of that process, I was looking at different lots and pricing them out. And I've started to see actually the pricing for Lord of the Rings stuff go up. So I don't know if some of you are out there bidding against me, picking up those lots on me, but enjoy it. They're great, great parts. And they have tons of capes. If you want to add those capes, you know, it's easy a lot of times to put it around the neck and just let it drape down the back. But what if you still want to use the pauldrons? The way the cape will hang, it will cover those pauldron holes. So how do you get that to work? I'm going to show you a little trick for that. So this is what I do. This is my Dwarven Hero. This features a great head sculpt by Matt O'Toole. Silver Legion Dwarf builder body. The hammer is actually from a Motu Goatman. But you can see on the back that he's got this cape. Now this blue cape, which I used, I thought the whole blue and silver color scheme worked really well for me. This cape actually came from a Marvel Legends Black Knight figure. So I had one of those in my fodder bin, finally got around to using the cape. But I didn't want to use it without the shoulder pauldrons. I wanted this character to have that really bulky, imposing look. So this is a trick that I do all the time when I'm putting these on. what I do, and this is only going to work, by the way, for fairly thin type capes. If you've got a cape that like billows out really, really big, like the one I'm thinking of is the Marvel Legends All-Father Build-A-Figure. And also, they did two of them. It was the same general Build-A-Figure, but they had two different heads and two different capes. One of them was supposed to be Thor, one of them was Odin. There's a red cape and there's a blue cape, and they're hard plastic and they're very, very billowy. You can totally use those on Mythic Legions, but you're not going to be able to plug the pauldrons behind that because it hangs out way too far. This is actually nice and small. It's really thin. This will work great. What I do is I get the X-Acto knife and I actually cut some holes in the back to plug the pauldrons through. Sounds pretty simple, but what I found is it's really hard to line the holes up right. So rather than try to create two perfect holes exactly where I need them to be, what I tend to do, and I'm going to pull the pauldrons off, what I tend to do is this. I actually cut a square like that. So that's a lot easier to do. Now, even though I only wanted the two holes, not that whole rectangular piece, the reality is when I plug these in, they come so close together in the back that they essentially cover that hole I just made. You don't really notice that there's a rectangular hole back there. I mean, you would have to literally be looking for it. It's so camouflaged. It works really, really well. I have found this, and this is trial and error. I've tried to cut the little holes and I try to poke it in. It's hit or miss. I have found that when I'm less concerned about just cutting two little squares, and instead when I just cut this rectangle that gets both of the ports at once in there, it is so much more effective. If you're going to use, where did the skeleton go? Here it is. This one, these two pauldrons on the back, they don't come as close together as the bigger pauldrons, all the big spiky arc pauldrons. So this one, you probably would see a little bit more of that hole if you're using this style pauldron, but definitely for the big pauldrons and for the spiky arc style pauldrons, they're so close together, I don't think you're going to notice. Put these back and see what we got for comments. So Holly's saying now we are getting more Lord of the Rings coming out. Yeah, actually I saw that. Diamond Select is doing some Lord of the Rings stuff. I was actually surprised. I'll be honest with you, I personally don't need any more Lord of the Rings figures. I have a small display of just some key characters from the old Toy Biz line. I personally didn't feel that needed to be refreshed, but that's also kind of my comment on a lot of the stuff I saw from Toy Fair. Like the Hasbro Ghostbusters, they look great, but I'm not a Ghostbusters collector, so I wouldn't buy them anyway. But I know that a lot of people shared the opinion that I had, that I was like, don't we have pretty much these exact figures from other companies that came out within the last few years that look just as good? So, I mean, to each his own. But I don't know. I'm not sure what the market is right now for those Lord of the Rings. The Goblin, it looked like they had a Goblin that had like 3 different heads. That one looked kind of cool to me. I could certainly imagine picking that up and teasing that into this line. I know a lot of people were really into the Sauron. The Sauron, I mean, it's Sauron. I can't look at that. And, you know, this goes back to something I was talking about the last few weeks when I was talking about custom heads. If I can readily identify the character as what it's supposed to be, I'm not as interested in using it in my Mythic Legions. If I can identify that dwarf as being Gimli, I don't really want to add it to my Mythic Legions dwarves. I want my dwarves and Mythic Legions to look like totally unique characters. So for that reason, I personally wouldn't fudge a Sauron into my display, nor do I want to use a Legolas for an elf or a Gimli for a dwarf or whatever. But definitely, I mean, if you didn't pick up the Toy Biz line when it came out years ago, if you were looking to, get some Lord of the Rings figures, the diamond ones look like they're priced right, and they do look like cool figures. Okay, let's see. A couple questions here. Dustin's saying, what's up, man? Chris is saying video of how you do the shoulder pads upgraded. Not sure what you mean, Chris. Are you asking me to shoot a video of that? Jeff, random paint question. How do you prevent paint rubbing joints? I prime and paint with Citadel paint. Do you spray a varnish? Probably the most common question I get, and it's a super flippant answer. I don't paint joints because painting joints sucks. That is literally my answer. I really don't like painting joints. Nikki has said this as well. I know a lot of people will sand them down to lower the clearance area so the paint won't rub. That's going to affect the integrity of the joint itself. So ultimately, I create designs that don't require me to paint joints as much as possible. If I am going to paint joints, because let's be honest, I do have to sometimes, I try to do designs where a little paint rub's not going to kill me. So say I'm doing, I mentioned earlier doing like a Templar skeleton. Say that I want to really dirty up those bones. I want to change how they look. Or even if I want to make them a zombie or something. So I don't want them to be bone, I want a little more flesh. Even if there's a little paint rub there and I see a little bit of the bonish color underneath, it's more forgiving. That's going to be okay. I try to do stuff like that. What I don't try to do is take like a flesh colored body and try to paint it blue. Because you're going to get that paint rub, and that flesh-colored piece right there is going to stick out like a sore thumb. So I very much try to find pieces that are either very close, if not the color that I want for those limbs. If I want to do a figure, if I need to have a black body, I'm going to try to find a Gorthok Shadow Orc or a Taurion Black Minotaur. Obviously, the Gorthok is very hard to come by these days. The Taurion is part of the All-Stars 3 sale, so he's going to be much more accessible down the road. But Jeff, that is honestly my answer. I don't prime everything. I will spray a base coat on some stuff, and I use sealer, like a varnish sealer. I use Tester's varnish, normally only on pieces that I know are going to get a lot of wear and rub, like weapon handles. I will seal those, or anything I sell. Any of the stuff that I sell, I will seal, just so it's got a little bit more protection for the buyers who are picking it up. But both of those things will not prevent joint rub if you are painting joints. Let's see, Harley, yeah, that's the one I'm excited for, the Goblin. Yeah, me too. That was the only one that I really keyed in on and liked. So Chris is asking, how do you swap other figures' shoulder pads to fit Mythic Legions figures? So it depends on the piece itself. So like this figure here, this is an example where this shoulder pad is from a Lord of the Rings goblin, this one right here, and then this skull one is from a WWE figure. They're glued. I honestly just glued them in place. A little bit of glue. There's no other way that I'm going to get those to actually fit on this, that I'm going to get them to adhere. They're not big enough to hit the back pegs, and they don't have the back pegs anyway. So just a little dab of glue works completely fine here. Sometimes this one is actually just glued prior to the top of the arm. A lot of times what I will do, especially if I'm going to do a character that's bare-chested but has shoulder armor, the shoulder armor needs a place to hold on to. So I always used side belts. I always crisscross the belts, and I imagine that the belts, the armor, the belts are holding the shoulder armor on. When I do that, I will actually glue the shoulder armor onto those belts. This particular one here, you can't see it, but he actually does have crisscrossed belts. They're just so covered up by some of the other stuff that's on it. But these shoulder pads, which are from a Spawn Samurai Wars figure, those are actually glued to the top of the straps. So they're clearly not meant to come off. When I do something like this, it's going on display. The only time it comes out of the cases is for a broadcast like this, or if I'm doing a show like Legions Con or something, they may travel with me. But Chris, that is kind of the way that I do it. It really depends on the piece what the best way to adhere it is. but by and large, it's going to be glued, whether that's glued to the figure itself, the shoulders and the arms, or whether it's glued to the actual shoulder straps, the belts that I put around it. That's what I have found to be pretty effective. So Chris is saying dyeing might work on joints. It works for Marvel Legends. That is a good point. Dennis has been doing some work with dyeing lately. I know that JD from Shelf Gravy, he just posted a few weeks ago some super cool Fury Ogres that he did. And what he did was he actually took some like Ogre Legion builders and he dyed them red. It didn't get the exact color he wanted. He still had to put paint on them, but it got those joints red enough that he didn't have to worry about painting the joints and they didn't look out of place. Dyeing is a whole other category. It's actually one I haven't explored yet. I'm considering doing it. I know that Dennis actually uses a crock pot. He bought a cheap crock pot, like a $15 crock pot. And because when you're dyeing these figures, the key is you got to keep the heat at a certain temperature, and it smells horrendous. Obviously, you can't use anything you're ever going to want to use for cooking or anything again. That's a horrible idea. It's got to be only for this. So he bought a crock pot specifically to dye. Dennis hopefully will jump on and do a live video someday, maybe show a little bit of his setup and exactly how he's doing that. But dyeing is definitely a way that you could get some of those joints painted, those joints to the color that you want, for sure. Okay, so we got 8:42 now. That's my presentation for the day. Hopefully this inspired you to grab an X-Acto blade and start cutting apart your Mythic Legions figures. But no, seriously, I think that when I was thinking about these different topics and some quick tips that I could give, this is something I haven't seen other people talk about. The painting tips and tutorials are super helpful. Nikki, if you're not following, first off, everyone on this channel who's watching now is probably following Nikki already on her Instagram page. But if you're not, go check out Nikki Nicole Cheney on Instagram. Other than just having some amazing, amazing custom work, she's also been posting a lot of like step-by-step tutorials on how she does a lot of her painting. Nikki is a wonderful, wonderful painter. She's been posting how she does some paint matching and stuff. I'm super impressed with how organized she is. Those types of painting tips are always super helpful. People love that. They eat those up. I actually have some more painting tutorials that I'm going to do in future episodes. But this was one that I thought would be kind of fun. This is one that I know anybody can do. You make some of these simple cuts. You can change around the look of some of these armor pieces and really start to open the door for some more detailed customs. So hopefully you found that enjoyable and informative as well. But before we close out, let's see if we have any more questions before I wrap things up. Oh, got a couple things here. So David, when I made the comment about whatever you use to dye, don't also use that for anything else like cooking. And David said, so why do my fries taste like paint? Yeah, you'd be surprised. I actually just broke, so the mug that I use to boil parts in, I only use it for that, and I dropped it the other day. It served me very, very well, so I actually have to go get a new mug now. We have plenty upstairs, but I got to get something. I'll find one that's enjoyable, some geeky type mug, and I'll use that no one else will drink out of it. Harley says she found it very helpful. Thank you. Well, you're very welcome, Harley. I'm happy to hear that. So Joe says, attaching shoulder pads rather than gluing directly to the figure and restricting articulation, you could cut a small piece of wide rubber band and glue one end to the body above shoulder joint, glue the other end to the shoulder pad, should allow for extra movement. Sure. No, there's a lot of cool things that you can do there. Like I said, I glue it onto the shoulder straps, and that seems to work fine for me. Another thing you can do, especially if it's going to be hidden, if you use hot glue, like a little hot glue gun, a tiny dab of hot glue will generally adhere it there, but it pops off super easy. And if you've ever used hot glue, once it's dry, you can literally just peel it right off. I've got plenty of stuff that I've used hot glue on. I tend to use super glue on these because I don't plan on taking the parts off. But hot glue is a great thing because you can certainly reuse it. So Mike Wells just joined. Better late than never. Mike, nice to see you. You can always catch it in replay. Any additional questions? Anything anyone want me to talk about before we close this out and I kind of talk about what's coming up? Actually, I'm pretty excited. I've got some cool stuff coming up in some subsequent weeks. A number of you have actually been reaching out to me, giving me some ideas for things that I can talk about on future episodes. And some of the suggestions that people have made are actually things that I was already considering. So that just reinforced me wanting to do those topics. So we've got some cool stuff coming up in subsequent weeks, including some stuff that's going to really be in response to some of those requests I got. So keep those coming if you have things that you want me to talk about. Chris says, do you use any stands for your figure? Sorry for it not being on topic. Everything's on topic. Don't worry about that. Do I use stands? For the most part, no. And that's because they're in the cases. The nice thing about these cases is I don't get a lot of shelf dives. When I used to, before I had all of the glass Detolf cases, when I had like open-faced bookcases, shelf diving was a legitimate concern. Things would fall all the time. With these, I find that if something falls over, there's no damage. They tend to stay on the shelf itself. Occasionally, they're kind of hanging right, and I have to open the door very carefully and kind of catch it. But I don't have a lot of shelf diving. The exception is obviously the stuff that's way on the top. You know, if you look on the tops, all the tops of these, that's usable space. I'm certainly not going to not use all that spot. So those pieces, I definitely do get worried about shelf diving. And I do have some stands up there. The kinds of stands I get, they tend to just be from like Amazon. I'm not sure who makes them, but they're, let me grab one. I'll be back. So this is an example of like one of the stands that I use, and it's got like a little metal base, and then this piece just kind of plugs right in. And they come in all different sizes. This one I think might be the 6-inch size, and it's too small. It actually doesn't work real good. The character that I had it on was crouched down very kind of low, so it worked with him. But I've actually gotten a few different sizes over time. I tend to find the ones that are for slightly larger figures than you think you need tend to work better. I don't love the look of stands. I think it breaks the actual display. But in this particular case, because I'm only using them for the tall ones, you usually can't see it anyway. Because of the angle that I have to look at it, it's kind of hidden. So these are the stands that I really like. But that's because I like my stands to be as unobtrusive as possible. If you've ever seen the 4 Horsemen stands, the 4 Horsemen stands are amazing. They work so well. They came out originally with like the Gothtropolis Ravens. They work wonderfully to position those up, especially if you want to kind of have them in a flight pose. But they're big. I mean, they're big and they're obvious. Like when you have those on your shelf, you can't not see those stands. So from a display standpoint, I don't care for those stands, but from a stability standpoint, they're the best ones I've ever seen. So, you know, you got to pick and choose. Amazon is where I get these, and I just look up action figure stands, doll stands, any of those kinds of search terms. Well, you'll find a bunch of different ones. It's funny, I brought a bunch of these. Nikki actually, for Legions Con last year, she was traveling, she was flying in, so she had obviously limited space to pack. I was driving in, so I had much more room in my truck than she had in her carry-on bag. So she asked me, she said, hey, can you bring some stands for me? So I bought a bunch of stands off eBay, and they ended up being super helpful. A bunch of people, I think Joe might have used some, Joe Vassapolo, who was there as well. Even I think even the Horsemen might have taken one from me as well. But I know a number of people afterwards asked me, "Hey, where'd you get those stands? They were really helpful," and just Amazon. Chris says it's like a small hot toy display stand. I assume you mean the the Horseman ones. Yeah, they're great. Joe says you can get these at Hobby Lobby for $250. Yeah, again, I buy them on Amazon in bulk. I buy them a pack. They're actually, I think they might be cheaper than $250 if you buy them in bulk on Amazon. But if you only need one, you don't want to buy 20, then certainly Hobby Lobby. In Rhode Island, there's only like one Hobby Lobby around us, so it's actually not convenient to where I live. So I've only been to Hobby Lobby one time in my life. Most of the time I go to Michael's. They do have doll stands at Michael's too, though. But again, I find them to be, if you buy them per piece, I find them to be a little more expensive. So that's what I have so far. If there's no further questions, it's 8:51, perfect time to start wrapping up. So what do we got here? All-Stars reminder, I said it at the start of the show, but it bears repeating. All-Stars is scheduled as of right now to end on March 2nd, which is Monday. Don't sleep on that. Obviously, everyone's got their financial realities. There was certainly a debate about that in the Cabal a few weeks ago. But if you are looking to get some of these figures, the pre-orders are the best way to do that. Don't let it pass you by. If you've been considering doing it, if you've been wanting doing it, picking some up, now is the time to do so. For sale Saturday. So this was actually an interesting week. A number of people posted Mythic Customs hauls in the Cabal, which was super cool for me to see. And it just happened to work out that way, where one of the buyers was in the UK, and I actually shipped him a package a few weeks ago, but by the time it got over there and got through customs, he just got it this week. And it was at the same time where someone bought my for sale Saturday figure from last week, and I finished a commission last week as well. So they all kind of landed at the same time, and they all kind of posted it within like a day of each other. They all posted their hauls with my Mythic Customs logo in the package, which was really cool for me to see, and it was interesting to see everybody saying, like, where did you get that? That was really cool. Obviously, I sell, I've told this story before, but I sell customs for very practical reasons. I only have so much room. I got to the point where I definitely had to make some decisions. I only have so much display. But once I did start selling stuff to make more room in my displays, I realized how much I enjoyed the experience of sharing my customs with people. Like anyone that's creating art, anyone that's creating some kind of expression, to have people genuinely appreciate it and want to add it to their collections or display on their walls in the case of art or whatever, that is a wonderful, wonderful feeling. So that is one of the main reasons why I continue to do it. And not for nothing, the money helps me continue to do this. So every Saturday, a lot of people were asking, where do you buy these? Does he take commissions? I don't often take commissions. I did take one this week. Typically, if people see something on my website that they really like and they contact me asking me about the possibility of doing one for them, if I have the parts and their budget is in line with what it would realistically cost to do that, I have been known to take commissions. But again, it's not frequent. What is frequent is that I sell on the Cabal every Saturday morning. I typically post at 10 o'clock Eastern time, and I post one item. And here on Mythic Conversations, I usually tease what that item is. This particular week is an orc. So I know a lot of people love the orcs, especially the green skin variety. This is going to be a green skin orc. It's not something I've ever shown before. It's a brand new piece that I put together specifically to sell. It's got some really cool custom 3D printed parts on it. So if you're interested in an orc, if you're around at 10 o'clock on Saturday, fair warning, the pieces do go really fast. I have one to sell, and it is first come. But that'll be posted around Saturday at 10 o'clock, my green-skinned orc warrior. Other than that, I will be back here next week. I'm pretty excited. I'm actually visiting the studio this week, so I've got some work to do up at the studio. Most of the work that I do on the website, obviously, I can do remotely. I'm here in Rhode Island. Obviously, the studio's in Jersey, so I don't have to get up there frequently, but it is certainly within driving distance. I can go. So I'm going to be visiting to get some work done, to actually get some cool content for the website, some of those behind the scenes articles that people really enjoy. I'm going to go there. I'm going to try to find more cool stuff. I'm going to bring more cool content to you. So when I come on next Wednesday, I'm honestly going to be like a day removed from visiting the studio. So I'm probably going to be super excited, super buzzing. I'm honestly not going to be able to share everything I saw with everyone here, but I will be very excited, and I'm sure that enthusiasm, if my enthusiasm for Mythic Legions doesn't shine through normally anyway, I'm sure next week it will be on full display. So super excited for that, super excited for next week's topic, and for another Mythic Conversations episode. Episode 5 is pretty much in the books. I'll see you all next week.